Hi class, I wanted to run through several examples of geometry that we looked at modeling over the last few weeks in Fusion, and specifically the create form or the sculpt mode. The first one we're going to look at is doing that basic flat plane and sculpting a little bit, giving some thickness to it, and then looking at how to go in on the inside of it and basically make it flat again so you don't have these kind of weird undulations on the inside of your plate or something like that. So let's go in and do that. One quick note, I did go in here and I already set my grid and snap settings. So if you go right there and choose that. So this is currently set to 10 millimeters with only one minor subdivision. So it's a little bit cleaner grid as far as that. And this is fixed so that what we see is what we get right there. Alright, hit OK to that. Go over to the Create menu, go down and choose Create Form. Okay, and then in here, under the sculpt environment, we're going to go over and create a plane. Okay, so in these primitive shapes, you basically got to get a plane to kind of orient it in the three-dimensional space. Choose the basically horizontal plane there, and now we can start defining the actual shape of this plane. I'm just going to drag this out. Now I can actually snap to these grid points when that's one of the options down there underneath the grid settings tool. Ends up I wanted this to be 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters, so I lucked out and that my two values are already set that way, so that's good. So I will click the second time there to go ahead and define that. Now it's a question of how many subdivisions I want to put on this. Normally it's very minor, maybe let's say 2 and 2 for something like this. So you only get 4 quadrants there to kind of work with. So to get something to really kind of sculpt and do some interesting shapes with it, you need to start increasing this. And so 7 to me worked pretty well, and I do it consistently or the same on both the length parameter and the width parameter for the number of faces with this. Okay, so that'll give us kind of those faces there to pull, and then we'll sculpt down. Won't worry about symmetry right now, although you could use it in doing something like this. Okay, so let's hit OK to that. So once again, this basic sculpting for this is to come in and shift click on the faces, and I will pick the 4 that are in each corner like that. Right mouse click and go up and say edit form, and there's my manipulator in the middle. I'll click and drag on that and simply pull those faces down, and now I start getting a surface, or this plane is kind of sculpted, getting a nice little undulation in the middle of it. You can do a lot with this. I can go in and kind of twist these if I wanted to really kind of add in some interesting sculpting inside of that. You can do a lot. I'll think right now, because I want to show some other things. I'm just going to keep it pretty much, just pull it down and do a nice symmetrical kind of sculpting with it. Alright, so that's good for right now. Let's get out of that. Let's go underneath, look the Modify menu, and there's a tool down there called Thicken. So pick that, pick the face. This tool basically works kind of like we've seen in SolidWorks with the Thicken tool. You get a thicken value. You can do it relative to the normal, which is this. So if we look at the sides of this, it's sculpting a little bit. It's going normal to the surface. If I want to do relative to an axis, I can pick that, and now it's pretty much vertical, going straight up. So I'll go with that one on this. And the other thing is, what kind of edge do I want? It only shows one type, which is this sharp edge. Okay, so no matter what I switch to, it won't show anything different. But know that if I choose soft, I'm going to get a nice soft rounded edge. And if I choose no edge, then I get basically an offset plane that happens with this. So I'll do soft. Okay, looks good. Hit OK to that. So there is my sculpted plate. Now, if I was eating off of this, I'd probably be a little annoyed, because in essence I would have 4 little quadrants where my food would collect, and it'd be kind of hard to kind of eat properly off of something like this. So I need to kind of thicken it up overall, and I want to then planarize the inside of this and then sculpt it out, and maybe even sculpt up the edges a little bit to get some planar definition in the middle of this. So that gets us into the question of how do we select things. I'm going to go to the top view, Just click on the view cube to do that. And there's two different ways to select geometry. But before I do that, let me point this out. Underneath the select menu, so that's what we're doing now, is basically selecting geometry. If you look underneath the selection filters, there's this option called select through. If it's on and I do something like this and then look underneath, you'll see I pick all the way through. Okay, so whatever is in the top and the bottom, it'll do that. What I want to do is just pick this top set of faces there and basically planarize them and kind of work with them separately. So that's not a good option there. So let me go back, turn off selection filters to not select through. Just click out here to deselect everything, go back to my top view. And then the other choice is, how do you select the geometry? Well, there's actually two different ways depending on which way you gesture. If I go from left to right, I get this kind of orange brownish box. Notice I'm in the middle of the outside sets of faces. If I let go, what happens is it only picks then what is actually inside of that selection box. Anything that actually touched it, it did not select. Okay, it didn't select through. Okay, it only picked on the top. So just to make sure, note that I did turn that off. Now that works fine. It'll leave some kind of undulation in the side, so I'm gonna actually try the other way. I'm gonna click off again. So once again, that was left to right. Anything that's fully inside, it selects. So notice if I do this, it gets only those little corner pieces. If you go from right to left, you get a yellow box with a dash outline, and what that does, let me show you that. It selects anything it crosses. So that's a quick way to select all these interior faces real quickly like that. Okay. Underneath the modify tool, there's an option to go and flatten. Okay. When I do, the basic one is to just basically looks at all the selected geometry, actually the vertices, and in this case fits it together, fits a common plane. In this case, it actually comes out and planarizes this real well, real quickly like that. So that's definitely one way to go with it. Another, let me just show you a couple of options with this tool, is to select a plane. Okay, so if I pick this plane, what happens is that it actually snaps down to that plane. So if I really wanted something to kind of work with, I need to do like an offset plane and kind of snap up to it. Okay, and then the third option is to select a parallel plane. So if I go in and choose that, pick this, it ends up, it picks the bottom face and basically doesn't do anything or keeps it the same way. So I actually want to do this first one right now to fit. Okay, got my planar attributes, great. Go back to the top, shift or click and drag and do from left to right to do from right to left to do a anything that crosses it. I'll go in and do edit form, right mouse click, and I'll simply pull this up to give this some thickness. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to do with this. So you can see there I got a little thickness with it. Next, I'm actually going to click off to deselect, and I'll go back to the top view, and this time I will do left to right. Okay, and it selected only the interior part of this. So it's a quick way to make changes. I'll drag this down, okay, and you can see I can now start kind of sculpting this in like that. It looks good. Let's scale this up a little bit. One quick way, when I have something that is kind of symmetrical like this, just grab the scale indicator right in the middle, and that is proportional scale and all the axis. So that quickly pushes it out to kind of give us a little bit more sharper edge with this. Okay, that's looking good. Now, I do want to show you one aspect that I mentioned. When we convert this, or say finish form, it converts it into the solid. If by chance I have done something like this, where I push this into the other surface down below, and didn't pay attention, didn't really notice that, it's very subtle, hit finish form, it's going to give you this error message indicating basically that it failed to convert this to a solid. Simply because they're intersecting geometry in this case. If you hit continue, you get nothing on the model side. Okay, if it can't create a good solid form, it will not give you anything. Instead, I'll undo that change that I just made there. Now I got kind of a nice flat area. Now I'll hit finish form, and voila, there is my nice finished plate. Okay, so we'll stop there for right now, and we'll come in and look at doing some more sculpting here in a second.